Recently, I've noticed that pollsters in the UK, just generally the political discourse in this country, has been kind of Americanized in the sense that we are talking about the next election long before it's even happened. Even if it's an early election, it's likely to be 2027, which is still well over a year away. So I think it would be a mistake to get into an American style situation where the election cycle is expanded. In this country, a general election period lasts for about a month, and the speculation around it traditionally, conventionally, has been a few months before. But now we're having a situation where we're talking about the next general election when the government's only been in power for 15 months. So I think it's premature. The other point about that is as unpopular as Labour is right now, and as much as Starmer has polarised many people, things can happen rapidly in politics. I'm not suggesting that Labour is going to suddenly do something very popular and they'll rebound significantly, but the other parties could mess up. It's not necessarily that, if we've seen anything in recent years, it's that political events can change things very rapidly. I think it is fair to say over the last 10, 15 years there have been a few political earthquakes. Um, the obvious ones are Brexit and Trump, but it's it just goes to show that you can't just look at a trajectory of something and say, oh, that's definitely the way it's going to be. So the trajectory right now is Reform's going to win the next general election, but it may not happen. Reform may mess up sufficiently to put people off. There are still a lot of people in this country that don't trust Reform. It's true that they've garnered a lot of support, but there's also a lot of people in this country that just won't vote for Reform, that will sooner vote for another party they don't entirely agree with rather than see Reform get to power. That's why I think it's a little premature to be for pollsters to be suggesting that Reform's going to sweep the board. Um, but for this video, I want to talk about the Green Party. Now, I'll be honest, I have generally not taken the Green Party seriously, and I still don't take them particularly seriously because where they have gained seats tends to be in places that would be liberal left anyway in their voting persuasion. I'm thinking of Brighton Pavilion and places like that. It's not really the sort of places, for example, where Reform are gaining votes. So this is not to dismiss the Greens' gains. They have unquestionably made gains in recent years, but a lot of the people who support the Greens are young people. They're ideological. They do tend to care about the earth, and I'm not bashing that. That's legitimate. But if Reform could be dismissed as a single issue party or be called a single issue party, i.e., immigration, 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 then it's fair, I think, to say that the Greens are a single issue party. It's environment, environment, environment. I mean, the clue's in their names, in their name. So that's, I suppose you could argue every party starts off with a single issue. With the Labour Party, it was, as the name implies, a party for working people, for the labouring class. That's how Labour initially began. And the Tories, Conservatives, was to conserve heritage and culture. And so there's ways of, I suppose every party started off as a single issue party. On the continent, Green parties have generally done quite well, particularly in Germany and a few other countries. But can the equivalents on these islands replicate that? I say on these islands because the Green Party of England and Wales is distinct from its sister parties in Northern Ireland and Scotland. And whilst it's true that Labour also has a branch in Scotland, like the Scottish Labour Party, which sometimes takes different positions from the main Labour Party, in the case of the Green Party of England and Wales, they are operating really for England and Wales. Whereas when the Labour Party is in a general election, it's the National Labour Party. It's not really differentiated from the Labour Party and the Labour Party in Scotland, and likewise with the Conservatives and their Scottish Party. I'm not saying there isn't differences of opinion within the parties in England and the parties in Scotland, but that's something to note. I'm going to read out the report by Millie Cook in The Independent in a minute, but there's a few things I want to say first. Firstly, I'll be charitable with the Greens. And this is coming from someone who will not vote for them, who does not trust them, and have plenty of critique of them. But purely for the sake of being open-minded, I will mention where I do agree with them. The new leader, Zack Polanski, I think he's quite a smart guy. He's clearly a good debater. I've seen him in Question Time. He can hold his own. I don't think he's stupid. There is something that's come up a few times. Apparently, he once proposed that women could get breast enhancements by hypnosis. Now, that's the sort of cookie thing you'd expect from a French party. Having said that, I'm not really a fan of digging up old news to smear someone. It's a little bit desperate, and whilst that is a bit cookie, it isn't really relevant to his leadership today. I mean, if you're going to dig up some embarrassing thing that a politician has said in the past, most politicians would have said or done something. And also it can, I'm watching Celebrity Traitors right now, that could be a double bluff and it could backfire on someone. So, other politicians should be careful about hammering Polanski too much on that point, because it's old news. It's not. I think he should be scrutinised on his views today and his positions today. That should be the focus. So, where do I agree with the Greens? They want a wealth tax. I do think there's something to be said for that. We keep hearing about the black hole in the economy, and it's always the same thing. It's always let's penalise welfare claimants. I suppose Conservatives would argue the wealthy are already taxed, but I do think there is some ultra wealthy companies where there's profits being made that really, that there is something to be explored in that why should some of the most vulnerable in society be scapegoated when some of the wealthiest are not taking the tax burden. Now, it's not that welfare claimants are being taxed or not, but they are, I feel, being scapegoated. So there is something in that. The Green Party supports Ukraine. Good. So that's something, but I wouldn't trust them on NATO and national defence. Well, one of my main issues with Labour right now is on China and national security, but I'll be making a video specifically about that. So sticking with the Greens, they've got it right on Ukraine. I think they're right about talking about wealth tax. I also think that Polanski made a good point regarding the prescription of Palestine action. He said that he's Jewish and he has been on these demonstrations, and as a British Jew, he doesn't want a terrorist atrocity to take away the right to peaceful protest. And after the attack, people were saying, out of respect, the marches should be paused for a while. I kind of would agree for 1 or 2 days, but I'm very wary of right-wingers who want to use that atrocity to silence criticism of Israel. There is unsavoury elements in the pro-Palestine demos, which I don't trust, but I think it's unfair to smear every single person who has concerns about Palestine and the Palestinian people as a Hamas cheerleader or an anti-Semite. That is not the case. So I do give Polanski credit for speaking up as a British Jew and saying, no, actually, I believe in protesting. I'm critical of Israel, because I think that too many right-wingers who happen to be Jewish think that they alone speak for the Jewish community. They don't. There's plenty of Jewish people who are critical of Israel. And one of the characteristics of anti-Semitism, like any form of bigotry, is lumping people into one group and saying you're all the same. So I would argue it's actually galvanizing anti-Semites to say that all Jewish people support Israel, because they don't. So Jewish people who do support Israel, that's their opinion, but they can't say they speak for everyone, because they don't. And some arrogantly do kind of imply that. It's not the case. So I give Polanski credit for making that point, that terrorism shouldn't take away our civil liberties. Now, this gets me onto some of the areas I don't like. Okay, I'm just going to read out the thing in a minute, but the general election hasn't happened yet. Manifestos haven't been published. So people might say it's unfair to judge when the manifestos haven't even been published. However, the reputation of political parties precede them. And it doesn't really matter what a new leader comes out with. If a reputation of a political party is deeply ingrained, people will think of that. So for me, there's several areas I do not trust the Green Party of England and Wales. The fact is they support their sister party in Scotland. They support their stance on independence. What their official line has been in the past is that's for the Scottish people to decide, but we support their stance. Now the Scottish Green Party supports independence. My question to Zack Polanski and his party is, how can you aspire to one day form a government if you don't even believe in keeping together the very country that you want to represent? Do you, Zack Polanski, want to be Prime Minister of England or the United Kingdom? That's the question. So I absolutely don't trust any party that is in favour of the breakup of the United Kingdom. That is the very foundations of our nation state. If you don't believe in the UK, how can you aspire to be leading a British government? It doesn't make sense. If you want to be a nationalist, fine, but don't then aspire to be leading the UK government. It doesn't make any sense. So a Prime Minister Polanski would just hand over the UK to the nationalists. That would be my big concern. Defence. You know, they are supportive of Ukraine. I give them credit for that. But historically, the Greens have been quite critical of NATO. They're also very critical of arms. Now, I do think there is a moral cause about the arms industry. I totally agree with that. And I agree with the Greens that we need to take a harder line with Israel, because even if it's a minuscule amount of weapons that go, any weapons, even if it's 1%, half of a percent, compromises our moral position in criticising Israel. You know, in criticising Israel, whilst on the other hand giving them weapons, it doesn't. So the government's response, of course, is that we have one of the toughest arms control regimes in the world, protocols in the world. That may be true, but there is murky things in the arms industry. And we also know, incidentally, President Zelensky has pointed out that there's components made in the UK being used in Russian weapons. So we may have one of the strictest regimes in the world in terms of arms control, but that doesn't mean that it's foolproof. And so that's an area, yes, I do agree with scrutinising that more. But if the Greens think there should be absolutely, like for example, we shouldn't send weapons to Ukraine, that would be my question. You support Ukraine morally, you know, you want to support Ukrainian migrants and so on. Great, wonderful. But do you accept that the Ukrainians also need weapons to defend themselves? That would be my question. What's the Green stance on NATO? Because hard left parties, and I don't believe the Greens are moderate left, I believe they're hard left. What's their stance on NATO? Because if they want to withdraw from NATO, then they're basically keeping company with the far right. Is that a position they'd like to be in? Earlier today, I looked at the horseshoe theory, which is that ultimately the far right and the far left come down to the same side when it comes to Russia. Now, to be fair to the Greens, they are critical, very critical of Putin and pro-Ukraine, so I give them credit for that. But what's their stance on NATO? Can we trust a Green government to defend this country? You know, I've no doubt they'll want to get rid of our nuclear deterrence, and that's one thing, but will they want to reduce military spending just because they don't like the idea of the military? I mean, it's all very well being pacifist in an idealistic world, but it's not reality. Not when we're living in a world with belligerent, powerful players like Russia and China. It's not realistic. So I don't trust the Greens when it comes to national defence. And then the third thing, so I've mentioned the UK, like the very foundations of keeping the UK together. I mentioned national defence. Crime. This is a big thing for me. Now, the Green Party of England and Wales were apologists for Just Stop Oil. What they will say is they're a separate entity. They're a political party. Just Stop Oil was whatever they wanted to call themselves. But the Greens vocally supported their right to protest, which by extension means the Greens had a disregard for the ordinary people whose lives are being messed around by that obnoxious bunch of sociopaths. Just Stop Oil was a complete and utter failure as a movement. They were deeply unpopular with good reason. They engage in criminal tactics. They engage in brainless vandalism. How vandalising the grave of Charles Darwin, and I made this point when I wrote to the Metro, how that reduces climate change or helps fishermen in Bangladesh or, you know, people suffering the effects of a typhoon in the Philippines. I don't know how they think that adds up. But the fact that the Green Party of England and Wales vocally support Just Stop Oil should show that they're protesters. They're not really a serious political party. So they need to start getting, I think they need to be scrutinised on stuff like that, really scrutinised. Zack Polanski, do you support the criminal act tactics of Just Stop Oil? If you do, then do you support the rule of law or not? I think he should be pushed on that point. But more broadly on law and order, the Greens are a hard left party. They're against the very idea of judicial punishment, and their history shows it. Every single time this issue has come up, the Greens have very much been, we need to rehabilitate, we need to educate, all the rest of it. That's fine. I've always said I've no problem with that. But any party, any politician who has a problem with the very idea of judicial punishment cannot claim they believe in justice. You just can't have it both ways. You can't say you believe in justice and you sympathise with victims of crime whilst you're simultaneously saying that criminals shouldn't face consequences for their actions. That's nonsensical. It's also, incidentally, reckless. So I absolutely do not trust the Greens when it comes to crime. In fact, I shudder to think if they got into government what they would actually do. At the moment, they're not going to say we're going to abolish prisons and let dangerous people roam free, but I honestly wouldn't put it past them. I think this is a party deeply hostile to the very idea of judicial punishment. That is not only an insult to victims of crime, it jeopardises victims of crime and the public at large. If you can't accept that dangerous people belong behind bars, then you're being incredibly reckless. It's just a mind-numbingly stupid position to take. I'm not against rehabilitation. I'm not against looking at the root causes. I'm not against trying to help former offenders change their lives, all the rest of it. But when a crime has been committed, there has to be consequence. Otherwise, we become a lawless society. Otherwise, the rule of law just doesn't apply. So, left-wing parties and politicians who are against the idea, it isn't just the Greens, who are against the very idea of judicial punishment, they need to explain themselves. And I hope if the Greens do gain success, they'll be pressed on this a lot more. Because I think when people realise how extreme their stance is, they might be put off voting for them. So without further ado, I'm going to read out their support. It's not too long, so bear with me. Let's see. This report's by Millie Cook, and she's also done an interview with Zack Polanski, although the video is showing something else. Violent scenes in Amsterdam, I don't know what that's about. Anyway, the Green Party is now in... Oh, one more thing, excuse me, I'm interrupting myself, but this is important. I think when MPs defect to another party, there should be an automatic by-election. If someone votes for a Labour MP, and that Labour MP then becomes a Green MP, it's betraying their electorate. Because, I mean, if I'm voting for a Labour MP, I'm not voting for them to become a Green. I think a by-election should be automatically triggered. Likewise, if a Conservative defects to Reform, it should be an automatic by-election legally. Because the voters should have a say on whether they want to be represented by a Green or a Reform MP. Okay. The Green Party is now neck and neck with Labour, a new poll has shown, as the party climbs in the polls following the election of Zack Polanski, but both are lagging behind Reform UK. A new poll conducted by Find Out Now put Nigel Farage's party on 32 points, a fall of 2 points since this time last month. The Conservatives are on 16 points, having seen no change since last month. Following closely behind are both Labour and the Greens, with Labour having seen its approval rating fall by 1 point, while the Greens have surged by 3 points in Mr Polanski's first month as the party's leader. So obviously a new leader is going to have a little honeymoon period. I would also say that points don't mean a great deal to the average voter. The poll comes weeks after Mr Polanski told The Independent he has had multiple conversations with Labour MPs about defecting to his party, as they become increasingly unhappy with the direction of the government. He said the number of Labour MPs he has spoken to who are dissatisfied with the party was in double figures, adding that the Greens would absolutely welcome disillusioned MPs as long as they share the party's values. Just an observation before I continue. The Greens must have changed the rules on leadership, because it seems that Polanski is the sole leader, whereas before they had like co-leaders, which was, in my view, a lot of nonsense. I don't know how you can lead with a duo. It doesn't really make sense. The poll, which spoke to 2,705 adults on the 15th of October, put the Liberal Democrats on 12 points, 1 point lower than this time last month. The disastrous polling for Labour comes amid growing questions over Sir Keir Starmer's leadership of the party, with voters increasingly feeling that he has so far failed to get a grip on the problems facing the country. While the Prime Minister was seen to have given a strong performance at his party's conference in September, taking fight to reform UK and accusing Nigel Farage of pursuing divisive and racist policies, it appears to have done little to bump up his standing in the polls. But, having a good party conference isn't the same as pitching to the wider public. Kamala Harris had a good Democratic National Convention. She still lost the presidency. Kemi Badenoch was also seen to have given a strong performance at her party's conference after using her main stage speech to announce plans to abolish stamp duty for primary residences, but like Sir Keir, she has seen no boost in the polls. Mr Polanski, who was elected as Green Party leader in a landslide victory in September, has vowed to impose a wealth tax on the richest 1%, put an end to arms sales and intelligence sharing with Israel, and push for public ownership of Britain's utilities and public services. Responding to the polling, he said, "When I was elected, I said we weren't here to be disappointed in Labour, we're here to replace them, and I meant it. Our membership is surging, already over 115,000, up 70% from when I was elected last month. We're about to overtake the Conservatives in leadership size, and watch this space, we're about to overtake Labour in the polls." But polls is not a win, and he should know that. British politics is changing. Greens are giving Britain hope again. Reform's strong performance comes just weeks after a major seat-by-seat poll put Mr Farage on course to be Britain's next Prime Minister, showing his party is close to having enough support to form a majority government if an election were held today. The multi-level regression and post-stratification poll, I can't imagine the average member of the public will factor that in. That's for political pundits. Which is the second such poll conducted by YouGov since the election, suggests a reform will increase its MPs from just 5 to 311, making it the largest party in the hung parliament and just 15 seats short of the 326 needed for an outright majority. And it showed Labour would lose 267 of the seats it won in 2024, putting the party in just 144 MPs. This is down from the 178 MPs YouGov predicted they would win in the last MRP poll. And that's the report. Now, for reform to go from 5 to 311, unless I'm mistaken, that would be the biggest surge in British political history. Even bigger than at the turn of the 20th century. Well, in the 1920s, when Labour went from so many MPs to get into government, to go from 5 to 311 would be phenomenal. But strange things have happened in politics in recent years, and clearly reform is getting a lot of traction. But I think those dissatisfied with Labour on the left might well consider voting for Green. What I respectfully say to them, of course it's up to you who you vote for, but I would say if you want to go to a centre-left party, go to the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats won't compromise on national security. The Liberal Democrats don't believe in breaking up the United Kingdom. The Greens do. So, the Greens are going to present themselves as a kind of centre-left party. I don't think they are. I think beneath that green exterior, they're actually pretty hard left. I don't trust them. I don't trust them on national defence. I absolutely don't trust them on crime. There's a few other positions I agree with, but that isn't enough to be swayed. Polanski, I think, is probably more of a heavyweight leader than some of his predecessors. He's clearly quite a smart guy, but I can see, left-leaning students who are big on green issues voting for them. It may well be that Labour's move to reduce the voting age to 16 will backfire on them, because those 16-year-olds might well go for the Greens. But I also think that's a misconception to assume all young people are left-wing. Some young people lean to the right. Some young people are sympathetic to reform. So it's a misconception to just assume all young people are left-wing. It's not necessarily the case. But I certainly won't be voting Green. When it comes to the issue of crime, they're at the exact bottom of the list for me. If it was solely on the issue of crime, they'd be at the very bottom, followed by the SNP. I say the SNP because on their watch, the Scottish Sentencing Council argues that people under the age of 24 haven't got full brain capacity. Therefore, they should effectively be treated as minors. Disgraceful. The big parties, Labour and the Tories, have failed on law and order. largely. Reform says they're going to be the toughest ever. If it was solely on the issue of law and order, I would consider reform. My only issue there is they're not entirely consistent. They always think it to migrants. What about domestic criminals? What about the yobs who want to set fire to cars and terrorise minorities? If they are really serious about law and order, they need to make it apply across the board and not just focus on migrant crime.